Well, good morning. This is Mike Kenny, Chairman of the ITOC Committee. I'd like to welcome everybody to the May 2021 meeting. Just for the record, I'd like to check with the clerk. Do we have a quorum?
Yes, we do, Chair. Yes, we do, Chair.
All right, thank you very much. As this is a Brown Act governed meeting, there are some rules about participation, and to explain those to us, I'd like to turn that over to Mr. Needham. And if you could run over the rules, please.
Yes, let me just get my screen up and running here. Apologies for brief delay here. Sorry about that. All righty. Yes, thank you, Chair Kenny. So the members will be using their cameras and we will be taking live public comments. Members are asked to turn on their cameras when they have a comment or question, and then Chair Kenny will recognize you. As noted on the cover page of today's meeting agenda, in addition to emailing comments, the public may also provide live comments during today's meeting. In order to provide live comments, you can join today's Zoom meeting through the link or by dialing one of the numbers from your phone that are provided on the cover page of today's meeting agenda. You may join the meeting by clicking on the Join Webinar link provided in the confirmation email, and you will receive that upon registering. And when public comments are called for on an item on the Zoom platform, you may click. It looks like we need to, maybe we have some background noise there. You may click on the raise hand icon in the Zoom toolbar, and that's at the top right of the screen. The chair will call on you by the name you provided, and if you are participating by telephone, you may press *9, and the chair will call on you by the last 3 digits of your telephone number. The instructions for providing live comments are also on the bottom of the cover page of today's meeting agenda, and that can be accessed from the home page of SANDAG's website at www.sandag.org. And all comments, whether emailed or live, will be made a part of today's meeting record. I'm not sure if we mentioned earlier, but I will take this opportunity to mention that we do have an interpreter available today, and his name is Facundo Alvarez. And he will be providing the translation for today's meeting. And with that, I hand it back over to you, Chair Kenny. Thank you.
All right, well, I did just get my run of show open. Thank you for helping me there, and a special welcome to the interpreter. This is the first for us, so we're glad you're here. All right, with that, we will start with item number 1, which is any comments from the general public that are not for items that are not on the agenda today. So do we have any members of the public who would like to speak on items on the agenda?
There are no public comments, Chair Kenny.
All right, and before we move on to the item number 2, the executive reports, are there any comments from the committee members for the greater good at the commencement of the meeting or beginning of the meeting here? All right, checking for hands, seeing no hands. All right, with that, we'll move on to item number 2. And item number 2 today is the Executive Director's Report. Director Ricardo, are you ready?
Thank you, Chair Kenny. Good morning to all you
Welcome.
members. Good to see you, as always. Few issues that I would like the members to be aware of. First of all, I would like to address an issue about equity that came up recently regarding interpretation at our board and public meetings. We fell short in reaching non-English speaking communities in a stakeholder meeting last month. We had not hired interpretation services for the stakeholders, and for that, I take full responsibility, and I am sorry, and we apologize. And promise that it will not happen again. We made it very clear that all of our meetings will be having the interpretation services because we continue to feel very strongly about reaching all communities regardless of the language. So again, for responsibility, won't happen again, I promise you, and we'll make sure that all services are available for all SANDAG's meeting. we take at Sandag these things very seriously. On the Central Mobility Hub, I just want you to know that last night we held a virtual public scoping session to mark the beginning of the environmental process. As I described this at the Union Tribune, to me, this is the point of no return. This region will have a Central Mobility Hub. The question remains is where it's going to be. Is it going to be at the NAVWAR site? Is it going to be at the ITOC or other sites? That mobility hub will have all existing and future rail, will have significant economic development opportunities, will have significant environmental sustainability, and will have significant housing issues. So I am really pleased with the progress we're making with our partners from the Navy. I'm pleased with the progress on the environmental. As you know, last session, the governor signed 2731, which is the first in its history when it comes to CEQA streamlining. Bill 2731. I want you to know that that bill is going to make it better and easier to environmentally and economically move this project. This is a very high priority for Sandag, and I want you to know that I will keep you informed. But the good news is, and this is really good news, four of our national congressional leaders have submitted this project for appropriation. And that's an honor to know that all of our congressional members saw this, the Central Mobility Hub and the Otay Mesa 2, which is two of our priorities, as something worth of submitting for in Washington, D.C. So whatever stimulus comes, Sandag is ready to compete and compete well when it comes to transportation. Regional, I'm going to talk a little bit about the regional plan. As you know, we're weeks away from releasing the draft regional transportation plan, a process that took us 2 years. If you recall, we were due for a plan 2 years ago. We ran a bill in Sacramento. We extended it for 2 years to give us time to work. We came up with the 5 big moves as a vision, and we are making this vision a plan that's going to be released to the public on May 28th. Today, you will hear about the work we have done for the regional plan from our amazing planning director, Cornelia Clemenson, our remarkable chief economist, Ray Major, will take you through the data. I want you to know that I take pride in the work that the team did here. Not because, doing a plan is one thing, but this is really about reimagining the future of transportation in San Diego. And honestly, it is about time that this region invests in the future. We, as a generation, inherited a great system, and we need to leave as a great, if not better, system for our kids and grandkids. And I believe this plan is going to provide that. Obviously, a plan is not worth much unless you build it, pay for it, and fund it. And that is something you're going to hear about today. I'm excited to share with you that the mid-coast is on schedule, on budget. You're going to see these beautiful red cars running trials this summer, and you're going to see it open to the public later this year. I guarantee you will be the highest line in terms of ridership. And I want to address a couple of things here. One is people are trying to guess what happened after we get back to some normal after COVID-19. To share with you that consistent with the governor's desire to fully open the state for business June 15th, I instructed our staff that we will be starting the opening of the office on that time to be fully open by September 7th. SANDAG did its own survey about employers and employees in San Diego, asking them what did they feel about working from home or what their desire is moving forward. Just to share with you that overwhelming majority of, and by the way, this survey is consistent with many other surveys in the country. And the survey is overwhelming majority of employees think they are more productive working from home, and they'd like to continue that. On the other hand, overwhelming majority of employers think they're not as productive and they want them back. And that's nothing surprising there, and this is consistent with many other surveys in the country. I feel very strongly that there is business reasons why employees should be back, given that we are a public agency, with some policies of maybe provide some flexibility that we're still working on that policy. The question remains, do I require vaccine for all employees coming back? And speaking to our chief counsel and the lawyers, obviously, if DA has to make this approval permanent first. Once they do, it's very likely that we're going to require all people returning back to be vaccinated unless there is health reasons or religious reason for somebody that they could provide. But we're getting back to some normal. We're looking forward to that. We lost some momentum for some of our priorities, but we're going to get it back. Our teams and staff did an amazing job for 14 months under very difficult circumstances. But we're looking forward to the time ahead. Let me just share with you that Caltrans traffic counts in many of our freeways is back to 100% of pre-COVID, 95 to 100% pre-COVID. And you wonder if many of us are working from home, why are people driving so much? And we're not unique. And actually, even so, the jury is still out in the data, but it is most likely that people who telecommute do more vehicle mile travel and more greenhouse gas emission than if they worked. They used to change trips when they go to work and come from work. And now they run everywhere. Our transit ridership, good news is it was down 90%, now it's down 40%. So we're getting back to some normal that we'll share with you in the days ahead. Finally, I want to remind you that next week is SANDAG Bike Anywhere Week, May 16 to 20. We are encouraging all San Diegans to pledge go by bike to work, school, store, beach, or just around the neighborhood. We have several self-guided activities and virtual events prepared for participants. Chair Kenny, members of the committee, that concludes my report. I'm sorry it took a little bit longer than normal, but I'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you very much for your report. Before we have any discussion up at the committee level, are there any members of the public who would like to speak on this issue?
No, Chair, there are no public comments.
All right, well, thank you very much. With that, I will open it up to the committee members. Are there any questions for the director? Your hands. Oh, Stuart, I see your hand.
Yes, thank you. And good morning, Hassan. Just one thing related to your comments, both about social equity and normalcy. I imagine the thinking people may not even be thinking about this yet, but once meetings are returned to in-person meetings, for sake of partly social equity and I think engagement with the public, I would hope that SANDAG, if permissible under the Brown Act exception, would continue to consider having meetings available via Zoom, because it strikes me that during this period, we've learned a little bit about how it actually has enhanced public engagement. And I think that's, sort of a valuable takeaway from all this. And hopefully you'd consider doing that to the extent possible.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you raised this point, Stuart. We have much higher participation in virtual meeting than would be in an in-person, and that's going to continue forever. For that, we are building the infrastructure, the IT infrastructure, to accommodate that. But you can expect in the future, we're going to allow public participation virtually at all meetings, regardless of whether we're in the office in person or not. And that's a proven point about participation that we're gonna continue. But I also, just to share with you and the rest of the group, our board passed a social equity statement, and a statement is a statement. It has to be followed by action. There is so much you're gonna see us discussing, and so much is gonna be changing, and so much is gonna be surprising people, because frankly, this social equity statement is gonna be followed by some tangible funding investment decisions that our board needs to take if they are true to the statement they adopted. And part of that is we want the public to have the easiest way to participate. We want the public to be informed. We don't want to hide anything. As I know, I am really big on this, and I work with our independent auditor. The public has the right to know a lot of things and more than we have been doing in the past. So communication, as far as I'm concerned, is a paramount priority for me when it comes to this, because we want to hold ourselves to what we said this social equity statement means, and in general, we want to hold ourselves to our commitment to providing the public service that we should. So regardless whether we're in the office or the board is meeting in person or virtually, the participation virtually will continue, and we're building the IT infrastructure for that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions for the director from the committee members? I don't see any. Director, I know, well, first off, it's great to see our federal elected officials and our state elected officials participating in the Mobility Hub project the best they can. I know at the state level, when there's action taken on the environmental approvals, that often can cut a good deal of time off of that process. Do you have any idea how much time it would save us with state action on that, as opposed to if we had to go through the full EIR process?
So this is, just to make it clear, the bill was streamlining CEQA, meaning limiting the days you could sue. And that always takes a lot of time. I mean, if people could sue forever and stop a project in the middle of it, this one would limit that ability. That's one. Number two, I think this would allow us to take the mitigation in a more structured way. And I think this bill, by the way, it's the first of its kind in San Diego, second in California after the LA area, Inglewood. This bill has proven to work out a lot of kinks that's going to end up saving a lot of time because it's spelled out. So I'm glad you brought this up. And also, if we truly want to recover economically, we have to be flexible when it comes to our environmental regulations. We can't take a project that should take 5 years and make it take 25 years, because the project then will lose its essence. But I'm glad you asked that question. I think we really worked hard on this bill because of that reason. We want to move things faster than normal.
Well, thank you again for the presentation this morning. One last call for questions for the director. Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. And we'll move on to, we'll go ahead and move on to our consent calendar, which is the next item. As we have, I think in our most recent meeting, the approval of the minutes is now on the consent calendar. So I hope all of the members have had a chance to review. Are there any questions, I guess, before we have any discussion on the consent calendar. Are there any members from the public who would like to speak on items from the consent calendar? Question for the clerk.
No, Chair, no public comments.
All right, thank you. So back to committee. Are there any members of the committee who would like to discuss or pull an item on the consent calendar? Looking for hands, seeing none. Do we have a motion to move the consent calendar?
Chair Kenny, I move to approve the consent calendar, including the meeting minutes.
Thank you. We have a motion from the vice chair. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. If the clerk could call for the vote, please.
Real estate right-of-way, Jonathan Frankel.
Yes.
Licensed civil traffic engineer, Chair Kenny.
Yes.
Contractor and construction is absent. Biology, environmental, Dustin Fuller.
Yes.
Finance, budgeting, Stuart Halpern.
Halpern, yes.
Licensed engineer, absent. CEO, private sector, Vice Chair Sunny House. And that passes with those in attendance.
Thank you very much. That brings us to our first item on our full agenda. It's item number 7. It's a report from Mr. Needham. Ariana?
Yes, thank you, Chair Kenny. Since your meeting in April, at its April 23rd meeting, the board was asked to conduct the first reading of the proposed amendments to the ordinance regarding the administrative expense limit, which you heard at both your regular meeting in March and then also at your special meeting in March. Board policy requires that there be a first and a second reading of the ordinance unless the board votes unanimously to waive that full reading. The board did not vote to waive the first reading, and this means that the entire ordinance may be read at the board meeting this Friday, when the board will be asked to consider approval of the proposed amendment. And then in addition, the board and other policy advisory committees have been receiving various regional plan presentations, and that's also an item we are looking forward to sharing with you as part of your agenda for today. And then I also just wanted to take a moment to provide an update on the status of the ITOC member solicitation. We are rescheduling the original meeting due to a last-minute lack of quorum, and we still anticipate being able to seat the new member who would serve in the construction manager category. And we also expect Vice Chair Sunny House to be reappointed in the private sector CEO category by the June meeting of the ITOC. That concludes my remarks. I'm happy to help answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Needham. Before we start the discussion at committee, are there any members of the public who would like to comment on this issue?
No, Chair, no comments, public comments.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Mr. Needham from the committee members? Looking for hands. I see no hands. Well, thank you very much for the update. With that, we'll receive and file your report and move on to our next item, which is item number 8, the appointment of Fiscal and Compliance Audit Subcommittee members. Yen, are you available to discuss?
Yes, I am.
All right, well, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Kenny and everyone. My name is Yan Ho, Assistant Finance Manager. The TransNet 2021 Fiscal and Compliance Audit process is scheduled to begin July 1st of this year. The ITOC is asked to appoint no more than 3 voting members to serve on the FY21 Fiscal and Compliance Audit Subcommittee. Generally, the draft of the FY21 agreed upon procedures are sent to the auditor. The auditor will then incorporate any updates or changes she may have. She will then forward these changes to the subcommittee members for review, comments, or updates. The final agreed upon procedures will then be presented to the ITOC in July. In FY20, The subcommittee members were Stuart Halpern, Michael Kenny, and Tracy Dragers. And that concludes my presentation. Do we have any volunteers for this year?
Well, thank you for your remarks. Before we take it up to committee, do we have any members of the public who would like to speak on this issue?
No, Chair Kenny, no public comments.
Thank you very much. All right, so back to committee. We're looking for volunteers. Are there any questions for you and before we open the discussion and look for volunteers? Let's move.
No, Ms. Chair Kenny, but I would like to volunteer to serve on that committee.
Thank you very much. We have one. I see a hand. Mr. Halpern.
I'm happy to do it again as well.
All right. Oh, there we go. Tracy, I see your hand is up as well.
Hello. Yeah, and I would certainly agree to participate as well.
I appreciate your help. So those are our two committee members and valued staff. So is that the extent of our requirement, or are we still looking for one more? The reason I ask is for those of you who are new to the committee, sometimes the idea that you would volunteer for a subcommittee straight away is maybe not appealing or surprising, but we do need people who haven't been on the committee very long to staff the subcommittees. So we have a continued presence at all levels of experience on the committee. So anybody else who might want to volunteer, who's new, here's your opportunity. But don't worry, you'll get other opportunities as well.
Yeah, Chair Kinney, I would be happy to volunteer as well if others are needed.
All right, Mr. Frankel, thank you very much. That's a good thing. So I appreciate you doing that. So with that, unless we have 3 volunteers, we can't have any more, or we'd be at a quorum and we'd run into a brown issue. So we have our 3 members. As this is an appointment, I think that calls for a vote. Is that correct, Ariana?
That is correct, Chair Kenny.
All right, so now we are looking for a motion to accept the candidate slate. Do we have a motion? I'm happy to make that motion. I'd like to move that we appoint the volunteers to the subcommittee as the discussion detailed.
Second.
And a second from Mr. Fuller. If we could call for the vote, Ms. King.
Real estate right-of-way acquisition, Jonathan Frankel.
Yes.
Licensed civil traffic engineer, Chair Kenny.
Yes.
Contractor construction is absent. Biology environmental, Dustin Fuller.
Yes.
Finance budgeting, Stuart Halpern.
Halpern, yes.
Licensed engineer absent. CEO private sector, Vice Chair Sunny House.
Yes.
And the motion passes with those in attendance.
All right, well, thank you very much. We'll go ahead and move on to item number 9, which is the draft 2021 ITOC annual report with a short presentation by Ms. Barajas. Julia, are you ready?
Yep, ready. Thank you. So good morning, everyone. Nice to see everyone made it. So I'm going to be providing a brief overview. Consistent with your role in overseeing the TransNet program, today's item summarizes the ITOC activities in one document, and that is the 2021 annual report. Based on feedback from the annual report subcommittee since your last meeting in April, the format of the draft annual report will continue to focus on the role of the ITOC and the results of the performance audit and the fiscal audit. We have made a few edits based on feedback to ensure the language strikes the right tone for our readers and ensuring the text is easy to read and the information being presented is clear and concise. The annual report includes a letter from the chair, briefly addressing excuse me, the new direction at Sandag with the regional plan, and also touching on the COVID-19 pandemic. Report highlights include the results of the 5th triennial performance audit. The executive summary of that is on page 2 of the report. The FY20 fiscal and compliance audits are on page 4, and the funding highlights are on page 5. There's a list of the FY 2021 activities and accomplishments of the TransNet program, and that can be found on page 6. And lastly, we've included priority projects, which are listed on page 7. There's been a footnote added to explain the importance of these projects and their connection to the TransNet program. So today, what we're asking from the committee is to provide any last feedback or comments on the report, as we will present the final report for the ITOC approval in your meeting in June, and that's June 9th. So if you have any last minute comments or suggestions, I'll be glad to take those now.
All right, well, thank you, Ms. Barajas. Before we take it up to committee for discussion, for the clerk, are there any members of the public who would like to speak on this issue?
No, Chair Kenny, there are no public comments.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Ms. Barajas from the committee members? Scrolling for hands. I don't see any that, and I would comment that there has been a lot of iteration between staff and committee members to get this into the format that we'd like, and I appreciate all your good work on that. We're looking forward to that document taking its next step forward. In absence of any other comments from the committee members, we will go ahead and receive and file your report today. Thank you very much, and move on to our next issue. So our next issue is a presentation on the 2021 regional plan, and I understand we're going to hear from Director Accardo, Colleen Clementson, and Ray Major. Team, are you ready? Perhaps I got ahead of everybody.
Okay, I think Hassan is going to kick us off, Chair Kenny.
Okay, well, looking forward to it.
Okay, well, we'll start and then maybe he'll chime in.
Colleen, I'm sorry.
There you go.
You know, I'm technologically handicapped, so I can't push buttons even. Thank you, Chair Kenny, committee members. I just want to introduce the team, and they're an amazing team, and I think you will enjoy their presentation, and I hope you challenge them with some questions. I know member Sunny and would I'm sure ask the right question to challenge the team here. But I just want you to know that this has been, I've done a lot of plans in my career, and I built big projects and small projects. This has been the most amazing thing I worked on with a team that really is motivated to truly have one goal, and that is to reimagine the future of transportation in San Diego. And yes, it is expensive. Yes, it's going to cost money. Yes, it's going to take time, but nothing worth anything is not going to cost money and take time. So I hope as committee members, you look at this as an investment in the future. It's overdue in San Diego. And I think while we don't have the congestion of many urban regions like in New York or Los Angeles, we are a region that want to continue to have the quality of life that we do, continue to have the best transportation system in the world. So I hope you'll enjoy today's presentation, and you challenge the team on this presentation. As I said, this vision that started 2 years ago is becoming a plan now, and that plan is going to have to be funded. And I don't have to say much about Colleen, our planning director, and about Ray Major, and I don't want their head to get any bigger, but They probably, and I was there with them, we've done hundreds of presentations around the regions for different stakeholders, different groups, different committees. And I think something I take pride in, we're consistent. This is our story. We're sticking by it until somebody proves us wrong. And you as leaders, going to have to either prove us wrong or stand behind and support us to move this forward. And that's exactly what I'm going to tell my board and the policy committees. We're willing to accept any challenge to this, but once we pass that, once we put it in the street, once we adopt it, it become a blueprint that I hope the leadership will stand behind. So with that, to the amazing planning director, Corina Clemenson, and our chief economist, Ray Major.
Thank you, Hassan, and thank you, Chair Kenny and Vice Chair House. We're really happy to be here with you today, and really just to bring you up to speed on where we are in the process of developing the regional plan as we are in the home stretch to bring the plan to life and release the plan by May 28th. So actually it will post to the Sandag website on May 21st. So today what we're planning to do is bring you up to speed on the data-driven approach that we have used to put the plan together. We're going to discuss how we've gone from the vision, and many of you were there in the meeting when we presented the vision to the board of directors in August. The preliminary results. So what are the results we're seeing with the plan in terms of travel time and access to transit and access to jobs for the residents of the region. We're also going to share with you today the cost estimates. Like Hassan said, it's going to be expensive. How did we come up with the cost estimates? What is the overall cost anticipated for the plan? And what are the funding strategies that could be brought together to bring it to life? And then we're going to go through the next steps. Ray and I are going to go back and forth presenting the information to you, and he's going to start off with the data-driven approach.
Thank you very much, Colleen. I think we've spoken to you about this before, but I just wanted to reiterate the fact that this plan was fundamentally built differently than any other plan that we've done in the past. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but our past plans have really been a refresh of a plan that we've had around here for about 20 years. And every 4 years we would update it. We would look at the projects that were in there and we would take them out, and then we figured out where we were with the rest of it and maybe make some adjustments. But this time around, what we did is we actually started from scratch. And so what we did is we allowed the data to drive the infrastructure and where it should be built and what the optimal solution would be. And so this was a huge departure for Sandag, but this is something that Hassan, when he came to the agency, really allowed us to do. So it was under his guidance that we were able to actually rethink what we were doing from scratch. And he wanted a bold new plan. He didn't want us to just refresh what we had in the past. And to do that, we kind of started from scratch. And there were really three challenges that we needed to overcome when we were building the plan. And one is to reduce congestion. And there are different ways to reduce congestion, but that's one of the goals of the plan. The second one is to meet our social equity goals. And the third one is to abide by state and federal mandates. And the issue here is that it's really easy to, essentially do any one of these three. What's really difficult is to find a balance that works on all three. So congestion you can do by, let's just say we build a whole bunch of freeways. If we did that, we could potentially reduce congestion, but we would not be meeting our state and federal mandates, and we would not be meeting our social equity goals. So what we needed to do is to find this balance, and these were the challenges of the plan. And some of the legislative mandates that really drive what we can and cannot do in terms of the plan are SB 375 and air quality. And these are important because these have really come to fruition since the last plan. And so they've really changed the rules of the game, if you will, in terms of how we do planning. But there's air quality, there's Title VI, which is the federal laws that are concerned about civil rights and environmental justice. And then, of course, CEQA and SB 743, which is really moving to goals of reducing the number of vehicle miles traveled. And that's something that in the past plans wasn't necessarily the goal. We were looking at other things like level of service. So we wanted to make sure that we had free flow on the freeways, for instance, but this is a completely different goal now. So this plan is in alignment with these state and federal mandates. When we take a look at the San Diego region, and this is just some background information that we were using as we built this plan out, you know, if we go back as far as 2000, what you would have seen is that the majority of the region was white. We had 60% white population, 40% people of color. By 2016, the white population was no longer the majority population. They only had 46% of the population. And by 2050, as we move through time, the white population equals about the same number of people as the Hispanic population, and white population represents about 40% compared to 60% for people of color. So our region is definitely changing. And then we also took a look at income distributions, and we took a look at where people were who potentially needed more help from a financial perspective. And this, again, is part of the equity goals. If you take a look at this slide, you'll see that somewhere about 35% of the people in the region earn less than $45,000. And I should, let me restate that. It's 35% of the families, of the households, earn less than $45,000. And if you think about this, you know, the average cost of ownership of an automobile in San Diego is around $12,000. If you think about what $45,000 is after taxes, it's about $36,000. So yes, you can get a cheaper car, but San Diego is extremely auto-centric right now. There's not a lot of alternatives to driving. And so in terms of a percentage of your income that is spent on transportation to get to jobs, to get your kids to educational opportunities, whether it's school or potentially, you know, like a junior college or trade school, it becomes extremely expensive for a vast majority, or for a large percentage of our population. In this group, there are nearly 1 million people who fall into this group in our region. So this is a huge percentage of our population. About a third of our population falls into this category. The San Diego population is also aging. And this is another consideration that we needed to take into account as we designed the regional plan. When we take a look at this graph, the blue bars represent the age distribution in 2016. And you can see that in the later years, the older people, 70, 75, 80, you see that there are far fewer people in those age categories. And so we have a community that looks like, you know, a lot of people working, high-tech businesses here, et cetera. If you take a look at what happens between now and 2050 from a demographic perspective, take a look at those last three bars. Those are the baby boomers aging into becoming older citizens of the region. 59% of our population growth in the region is going to be age 75 plus. If you convert that into numbers, you're looking about 450,000 people being over 75 years old, and about 1 million people of our population being 65 and above by age by 2050. And this is a huge demographic shift. And although it may not be that important right now, a lot of these people are going to be on fixed incomes, they're going to be on reduced incomes, and many of them don't necessarily want to or should be traveling necessarily by an automobile. So we need to rethink the transportation system in light of what the demographics of the region look like in the future too. And we've taken that into account in the plan. So some of the data that we developed for this particular presentation, and we've used these in other presentations, so you may have seen these slides, but one of the things we did was really to look at the population density of San Diego. You see that it's predominantly in the western 1/3 of the region. And the darker the purple shows where more people live. We also developed a concept called employment centers, because about 1/3 of the trips are people going to work. And so making that connection is extremely important, and that causes a lot of the traffic, especially during peak hours. So when you look at peak travel times, in the mornings and in the evenings, it's people moving to and from work. And so we developed employment centers based on density of employment. This had nothing to do with underlying geographies. This is a new concept we brought into the data-driven planning. And then we also started to use cell phone data, which was new with this plan. The ability to actually tell where a person started and ended gave us this link into big data to really start to validate how people move around the region. Some of the big data things that we looked at, the data came in, and this is information that we had a really hard time collecting using our old method, which would have been survey based. It would have been a paper survey that, or a telephone survey of people and where they're going. What we were able to do is to understand how trips came across the border. We were also able to understand how people use different activity centers in San Diego. So if you think about the beaches and the bay and SeaWorld and the zoo, for instance, a tremendous number of people go there and tourists go there, and they don't necessarily fill out our survey. So understanding how people move between these is important. And then of course, the military population. For security reasons, the military can't give us the names and addresses of where people actually live. And so, but using this type of data, we can kind of approximate how the military travels through the region. And being such a large military town and having 10% of our employment in military, it really does make a big difference. In the map with the blue line shows you how we can start to understand how people are moving around the region to these military bases. Some of the analysis that we did early on included trying to understand whether or not our existing alternatives to driving a single occupancy vehicle actually worked. And so we looked at this objectively. And what we did is we said, what would it take to drive 15 and 30 minutes from Sereno Valley? And that's the map on the left-hand side. The map on the right-hand side says, what would it take between 15 and 30 minutes in public transportation? And you can see how different those two geographies are. You essentially can't even get down Mira Mesa Boulevard or out of the employment center in 15 minutes. In 30 minutes, you can kind of get down Mira Mesa Boulevard. So if you don't live there, public transportation is really not an option. And so we were able to start to understand that the fact that we don't have really good alternatives in the region, and intuitively you know this, is one of the reasons people don't choose not to take it. We need a system that is as fast, as convenient as the automobile. And looking at data this way we were able to actually look at it and be able to quantify how good our alternatives were. When we took a look at other data in terms of where people live and work, we did this for all 81 of the employment centers. This particular employment center is Sereno Valley, our largest employment center. Each one of those blue dots represents a person who works in the green area. So every morning, these people get up and they get on the freeways in their automobiles and they go to Sereno Valley to work, and then they go home. 129,000 of those people, and each one has an average commute length of 14.8 miles. So this particular area, if you think about it as kind of a living, breathing entity, I mean, Sereno Valley exists and therefore people go to it for reasons. It generates 3.5 million vehicle miles traveled per day. So we're able to now take a look at different areas in the region and understand how they generate based upon the demand for what's there. And so then what happens is that we can start to develop infrastructure that helps minimize that. So we took a deeper dive into looking at how people use infrastructure moving into Sereno Valley. And you can see, for instance, that 49% of the traffic on I-5 at Gilman Drive is destined for the green areas, Sereno Valley. So that means when we used to have those huge backups on 5, every other vehicle is going to the exact same place. And so what this allows us to do is to start to understand where the origins and destinations are of the trips. When we start to pair those up, we start to get an idea of where the demand really is within the region, and not just an easy place to put a trolley, for instance, but how about putting the infrastructure that would link where people really live and where they work. And so this was data that we could use to do that. I think we're at the 5 big moves. So I'm going to hand it back over to Colleen to kind of discuss what came out of the data, and then I'll be back to discuss the results.
Okay, so we used this tremendous amount of data and applied these 5 big strategies. known as the 5 big moves: the complete corridors, transit leap, mobility hubs, flexible fleets, and the next operating system. And as we've discussed with you all before, complete corridors is really thinking about our entire roadway system being multimodal, in that it facilitates goods movement and carpools and transit and high-speed transit, as well as bikes, walking, and the flexible fleets within all of the corridors. What really, when we start to bring the plan to life, from vision to plan, and in meeting some of the state laws that Ray pointed out, Senate Bill 375 requires that we meet a greenhouse gas reduction per person of 19% by the year 2035. So what I'm going to be sharing with you is thinking about all of the improvements that are proposed as part of the system and what we can anticipate by 2035. So the first thing is the build out of the managed lanes throughout the entire highway network. So all of that we anticipate by the year 2035. Similar with goods movement. So the improvements at the 3rd border crossing, as well as improvements in the Los Angeles to San Diego rail corridor, all of those improvements by 2035 to facilitate goods movement. Also, the safety improvements on the rural corridor. So this is the really important work that needs to be done to make sure that we have good evacuation routes and that we're addressing the safety issues on the rural highways. All of that done by the year 2035. When it comes to Transit Leap, the first thing that happens is we're able to really construct the robust rapid bus network utilizing the complete corridors, utilizing the managed lanes on the highway system, and also getting some significant planning done on the commuter rail system. So this shows the map of the managed lane system that would also accommodate all of the rapid bus services. This is the long range commuter rail network. And so this dark purple shows where we are planning in the plan. This would be commuter rail that would be either subway, above ground, below ground, but completely separated from vehicular traffic. And this is the high speed 80, 90, 100 mile an hour sort of services. So by 2035, we have proposed in the plan completing that portion in the low sand corridor, as well as a significant portion of what is known as the purple line. And this is the new rail line that would connect National City and Chula Vista to the higher paying jobs in Kearney Mesa and then in Sereno Valley. Mobility hubs, as you know, these are the dense areas in the region where growth and development would be focused, as well as multiple high-speed transportation options all coming together. These are the mobility hub areas that have been identified in the plan, and then the coverage with the flexible fleets. And so remember, the flexible fleets are the smaller vehicles that can help us get within mobility hubs, to and from mobility hubs, and help to get people to high-speed transit. Just to zero in on one mobility hub in particular, and this is the Central Mobility Hub, which Hassan talked about in his executive director remarks, that we held the notice of preparation for the environmental document to get this work underway. But the proposed Central Mobility Hub again would be anticipated in the plan by the year 2035 and would really serve the region as a major hub where all high-speed transit comes together, along with the connection to the airport. And then flexible fleets, and the important part about flexible fleets to really help make these work is making sure that we have space on local streets and roads, whether it's the curb space that allows for seamless drop-off and pickup, as well as the space for whether it's e-bikes or scooters. All of these things are anticipated by 2035 within the mobility hubs. And then a number of capital and planning grants that local jurisdictions would be eligible for. So we're really, and we want to come back and talk with you about this, but how we pair up the TransNet Smart Growth Incentive Program with new funding that's coming from the state of California that will help to facilitate housing development within the mobility hubs. And so really pulling together a very strong incentive program to encourage the kind of land use pattern that can really facilitate the transportation system that is planned. Similar with active transportation. So the bike network that would really facilitate e-bikes, safety. You've all heard about Vision Zero, that we want to get to zero fatalities as for bicyclists and pedestrians in the region. And so making sure that the facilities that are constructed are safe, they're separated from vehicular traffic, and a significant portion of that being constructed by the year 2035. And then also the vehicle charging for zero emission vehicles, charging incentives, bringing our bus and other fleets into, that they are zero emission vehicles by the year 2035. So all of these things are coming together to help us meet our greenhouse gas goals. And then the fifth big move, which is the operating system, this is really managing the system to optimize its usage. And this allows us to use our phone to make trip making, as well as managing congestion. This comes along with a whole system of pricing that helps to influence behavior in ways that reduce vehicle miles traveled per person. All of that helps us with congestion management. So when we talk about value-based pricing and employer programs, a lot of work still needs to be done to figure out how to price the entire system, but that is a really important part in managing the demand. We also have proposed in the plan additional funding for employer programs to incentivize telecommuting and a lot of the things that we've already been testing through the COVID-19 timeframe. So this is the network. I think we've shared this with you before, a completely connected managed lane system throughout the highways, improvements on the rural corridors for safety. This is the big picture vision for the high-speed transit commuter rail network, improvements on the trolley to speed up services. And this is really about grade separation in particular areas. The mobility hubs, the network of rapid bus services, and all of this supported through the next operating system, the technology that makes it all work. So preliminary results. These are some of the things that Ray is going to go through with how we're looking at performance. We've put all this detail into our transportation model, and these are some of the results that we're getting.
Thank you. So the data I described before was data that we used to help inform and produce the plan. And the data that I'm now sharing with you is the results that are now coming out of the model once the planners have designed the transportation system in the future. They give that information to the modeling team. The modeling team puts that in to see what would happen if we built this. So when we take a look at mode share, and mode share is the number of people who use these different types of ways to get around, you see that 80% of the people in the region, or the trips in the region, were drive alone. Another 13% were carpool. So when you hear 93% of the trips were taken by automobile, this is where that statistic is coming from. And then there were 3% for transit and biking, and very little else that was actually going on in 2016. But what the model is starting to show us is that we will be able to, by 2035, reduce that drive alone share to 62%, increase carpooling by 17%. And you see a really large increase in transit going from 3% to 13%. So that's almost a 4x increase over there. And the reason that you see that is that the new system starts to provide a true option for people to get around. That's one of the big reasons, is that a lot more people have access to the system and they can get to where they want to go. And another one is incentives in terms of like what it costs to actually drive. And then about 7% biking and walking as we build out all of the biking and walking facilities that Colleen talked about. By 2050, you see that the drive alone percentage goes down to 56%. This is the reason that we're able to meet our state and federal mandates when it comes to things like greenhouse gas emission, because what we're offering an alternative and we're having people be able to move to it. I showed you these two maps before. When you overlay these two maps, what you see is that our employment centers are pretty much kind of embedded where our population centers are. And this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody who lives in San Diego. So when you start to overlay this regional transit access, you see that what it's really doing is it's tying the employment centers and the population centers together. And then here I show the next the next generation of rapid, and you'll see that that all ties together. So social equity was one of the big goals we had in this particular plan. This graph shows what percentage of low-income population, people of color, and senior population can get to have access to commuter rail or light rail within half a mile of their location. And you see it's around 10%, okay? It's less than 10% for the regional total, but you see what it lays out like now. In the new regional plan, you'll see that those numbers are significantly increased. So regionally, about 1 in 3, and you see that some populations, like low-income population, is up to 38% in terms of access within half mile of commuter rail or light rail or rapid. And then you'll see that that continues to increase into 2050. So this is, we were super happy to see these type of results coming from the model, because we didn't know how the system was going to perform, and now we start to see that it really is impacting the populations that we were targeting. When we take a look at employment centers, and this is a map that's similar to one that I showed earlier, but we're only looking at the low-income households here who work in these employment centers. And you see that they're kind of all over the map, or all over the region, and they need to get to those blue areas. And so employment centers are where most job opportunities are. And it's not just high-paying jobs that exist there. There are a lot of jobs that are low-paying too. So you have janitors, you have maids who are at hotels, et cetera, that would fall into low-income households, and they need to get to work too. So right now you see within a half an hour, about 16% of low-income people can get to a tier 1 employment center. Within 45 minutes, about 35%, and you see it's 13% and 32% for our minority population. By 2035, you see that that's increased to about 51% within 45 minutes for low income, and 46% within 45 minutes for our minority population. So again, needle is moving in the right direction. And these numbers just continue to increase as we move into the future, as more of the plan is built out. Tier 2 employment centers. So Tier 1 employment centers has most of our corporate headquarters. Tier 2 employment centers are usually clustered around either hospitals or retail centers. And so there are a tremendous number of jobs in these areas. Again, the distribution of the people who work there is shown by the green dots. And you see the numbers. I'm not going to read all of them to you, but you can see that by 2035, over 78% of the people will have access to an alternative form of transportation to getting to their employment center. And then by 2050, it's 80% for low income, and it's 76% for our minority populations. So again, things are moving in the correct direction when we start analyzing this data. We also talked to the board about cost estimates and funding strategies. And Stuart, as you know, because you've been with us for a while, these are things that SANDAG didn't always come out in the forefront and just put out on the table. And one of the things that Hassan has really instilled in us is complete transparency and honesty. And so whatever it is, he wants those numbers to be out. And so we showed the board for the first time really is what the numbers actually look like. And so we did this comparison in 2020 dollars so that you can compare the two plans. The 2015 plan that was adopted by the board of directors a few years ago was a $130 billion plan. So that we inflated those numbers to be 2020 dollars. Then we took the 2021 plan and we compared it in 2020 dollars so that you can have a direct comparison and you can see where the money's being spent. And you see that there's a larger amount of money being spent on capital, and a lot of that has to do with the transit system that we're building out. this is where we started to really dive into it and put out there the actual cost of what was going on. And these are our best estimates of how much it's going to cost between 2021 and 2050. This is what the 2015 plan looked like. So what this helps you understand is where the changes were in the plan in terms of potential expenditures. So you see transit operations, we had in the old plan, we were thinking it was going to be about $27.6 billion, followed by managed lanes and roadways, and then transit capital. So you can see the categories here. And then in the 2050 plan, there's a significant shift. And so you can see there's some decrease in transit operations and in managed lanes, but the big increase is in transit capital. And that's building out this system of rapid high speed buses, and also some of the other capital projects that we have there. And then you see the rest of the costs, including more incentives for things like TDM and grant programs. And you see that there's money in there for flexible fleets, and also some transit subsidies for social equity reasons, and some funding for the next operating system. So this is the cost comparison between the two plans. Okay, when we take a look at the revenue assumptions, this is where does this money come from? So we are mandated federally to give a plan, to give a funding plan of how we potentially could pay for this. And it doesn't mean that it's 100% exactly this way, but it needs to be something that's within reason. And so this is what we proposed, or this is what we had in the 2015 plan. You can see that state and formula grants and federal formula grants were the two highest categories, followed by TransNet. And so a lot of our dialogue and conversation at the time was, we use transit to get matching state and federal monies. And so therefore, these are the biggest sources of funds. And then you see there was general local, there was fare box revenue, et cetera. And this is how the revenue came in. Well, this $18.2 billion that we had in the 2050 plan includes the error in the forecast that I know some of you are very aware of what happened. And so that $18.2 billion was counted as potential revenue in the plan. In the 2050 plan, or in the 2021 plan, we've corrected that number. And so instead of being the largest revenue source after state and federal funds, TransNet is now like number 6 in terms of providing federal or funds for the plan. And the reason this is important is that as we rethought the plan, and we come up with the new ideas of how people could be moving around, and taking into account things like technology and these mobility hubs and flexible fleets, a lot of the TransNet projects that are in the plan right now may not be able to be implemented exactly the way that we had envisioned them. And one of the reasons is that the $18.2 billion we knew already wasn't exactly going to be able to pay for those projects in the future. But now when you look at it, it's $10.6 billion. And as our population growth slows, that number actually keeps coming down. And so we are going to be bringing to you at a later time, and Colleen will talk about this. We'll show you what the projects are in TransNet and how we plan on servicing those particular areas in the new plan. But what you can see here too is that there are additional funding sources. And so we are very clear about the fact that there needs to be some type of road user charge. So that would be something like a VMT fee, that potentially there might be a future sales tax measure that would bring in additional revenues, and that there might be other things like managed toll lanes that needed to have charges against them. And the reason that we need to do this also is that these type of funding mechanisms help change behavior. So when we can directly tie a fee to using something, people make a decision to change from one mode to another. And that's really one way that you manage the entire system. Here are the funding strategy comparisons that we showed the board, and what we wanted to show them here is that even in the past plan, we had road user charges embedded in there. We had managed lane charges embedded in there. And we had a big chunk of money that we thought was going to come from the California high-speed rail that is no longer in the plan. So we backed that out, and we show them now what the estimates are coming from these additional revenue sources. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Colleen.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up here. This just shows you some of the things that we have brought forward to the board of directors. We did the vision to plan. So what we shared with you today, we did the vision to plan presentation with the board in February. In March, we talked about the data and modeling assumptions, the cost, pricing, and funding strategies that Ray just outlined. On April 9th, we went into detail on technology considerations. And really what this is about is technology is coming, and it's best for us to plan for it than to just let it happen, so that we can leverage all the technology provides us to make the most of our transportation system. We went through a lot of the equity information with you here today, and we did that with the board on April 23rd. And then on April 30th, we talked to the board of directors about how we align state goals, regional planning, and local planning, and really using the regional plan as a way to set up our local agencies to be successful in their climate planning and their land use planning. We have 2 board workshops planned next week, Monday, May 17th and Friday, May 21st. You are all invited to attend those workshops as well. And that's where we will be digging into the detail about how this whole system works and what's envisioned at, at a very specific level. We plan to release the draft plan on May 28th. And then we're going to be working with the chair and vice chair to do a special workshop with you this summer to really tackle and discuss what Ray brought up. And that is what was envisioned in the TransNet ordinance and how has that been envisioned in the regional plan. And we want to make sure that we have plenty of time to discuss that with you this summer while the draft plan is out for public review. And so with that, that concludes our presentation, and happy to turn it back over to the chair.
Well, thank you very much. That was a lot, very thorough. So I'm sure there's plenty of questions from the committee members, but before we do that, let me just check with the clerk. Do we have any members of the public who would like to speak on this issue?
No, Chair Kenny, we don't have any public comments.
Thank you very much. All right, so the committee will entertain questions from other committee members. I see Ms. House, Vice Chair House has her hand up. Sunny, would you like to ask a question?
Thank you, Chair Kenny. I have a question, and I also have a statement at the end. I wanted to know, you've used 2035 and 2050 as your milestone years, and I'm just curious, what percentage of the plan do you think you will be completed or will be completed by 2035? And then are we looking at 2050 as the full completion, or how is that going to work?
Yeah, so Vice Chair House, excellent questions. We will have a significant amount of the plan done by 2035. I think it's important to recognize, and from the kind of work you do, the really heavy duty, construction of, say, a subway system takes time. And so those are things that will happen later in the plan. So a lot of the improvements that we can do, sort of repurposing the existing highway system, taking advantage of shoulders and really connecting all the managed lanes and getting the rapid bus services running there, providing funding to local jurisdictions for affordable housing in the mobility hubs. Flexible fleets are coming. So kind of how we organize all that. Those are the big things that we can do by 2035. It's after that. I mean, we all know what it's taken to get the Mid-Coast done. So those are the kinds of things that you see out to the year 2050. So that's how we've broken it down in terms of phasing, both as a way to meet the goals that are laid out in state legislation to make sure we meet those climate goals by 2035. But we have to be reasonable in what can actually be done in that time frame.
Makes sense. Well, I really appreciate this. I think it's excellent. And I do want to congratulate Hassan and really the Sandac staff for this bold vision and this plan. I think, as Ray mentioned, the key was to start from scratch and come up with a new vision for mobility for San Diego. I don't think we've ever done that in the past. And this is different from the norm. It's not just more of the same, but it's comprehensive, it's connected, it's a smart plan, it's balanced for the region, and it addresses a lot of the various requirements like safety, equity, technology, and many others. I think the world has changed a lot since the last TransNet measure was passed 17 years ago. With the fast-paced advances in technology and changes in population and modal choices, as well as really mandatory regulations, it's really impossible to try to come up with an ordinance and requirements in an ordinance for the next 40 years, as we've done with TransNet. But if we really want to make the best use of the taxpayers' funds and be fiscally responsible as an oversight committee, I think it's prudent for us to support a plan, a mobility plan that offers the best and most efficient solutions to meet the mobility challenges of our region in the future. To my knowledge, having lived in San Diego for over 24 years, I've never seen something like this done, as you mentioned, by SANDAC. And in the 35 years that I've been in this business, I really have not seen a region to come up with a plan and a vision that is well established, in other metropolitan regions. So I think, I know there's a cost associated. It's a large increase in cost, but I also believe that, like anything in life and in business, first you have to set a goal, then you have to set your strategies to accomplish that goal, and then have a plan of action to move forward. So I'm very proud to be living in this region and be a small part of this program, and to have the opportunity to support it. And I look forward to the implementation of this state-of-the-art vision and comprehensive plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair House. All right, I'm looking for other hands from committee members. Stuart Halpern, I see your hand is up, sir.
Yes, thank you, Chair Kenny. Just a couple of comments, and I did have a few questions. First, my math says that this plan is about 23% more expensive than the existing plan. Having served on the Triennial Performance Audit Committee of the ITOC for a number of years, one of the things that we've really wrestled with quite a bit is the notion of outcomes. And it seems to me that, the 23% increased cost of this plan looks as if there's just, a dramatically far higher than 23%, almost incalculable increase in the likelihood of just better outcomes and the kind of outcomes that I think that we're really we're seeing with the TransNet ordinance in the first place. So I, kind of agreeing with Sunny, I really think this is amazing, and really look forward to getting this going. The other thing I just want to say, I think it has to be said, is that this is, a tremendously complex project plan. Just the presentation, the communication of it itself that you guys are doing is really fabulous. You're really doing a wonderful job of communicating in a very visual way, a lot of highly complex information, a lot of numbers, data, statistics. So I really applaud the effort just simply in the presentation of it itself. But I do have a few questions. One thing that I think may be a little bit missing in the presentation, though, is the notion of economic development perspective. And I respect the fact that you might say that that's not really your bailiwick, but I think it would actually enhance our understanding, the public's understanding of this, if you could add a little bit, and maybe, I don't know if Ray or Colleen, if you've begun to even, or even Jim, think about some of the questions that, for example, in terms of economic development, there are two sides to it, right? One is the building of the whole system, and then there's the ongoing incremental economic activity that the system could facilitate. And so in those two pieces, I'm wondering if you, Jim, maybe it's more you than Ray, have you begin to think at all about what the total number of sort of man years of jobs that building all this would bring to the region as part one of this? And then secondly, and I don't know, maybe this is more Ray, and if there's any sense of what kind of incremental economic activity this plan could actually bring to the region, because instinctively it seems like there would be some.
Actually, there is a tremendous amount of benefit that it brings to the region, and we're working with our consultants. So we outsource this particular economic analysis because it's beyond the capabilities of our internal staff to do it by ourselves. And so we have consultants who are working on it in addition to Remy, which is kind of the state-of-the-art model that shows how some of these inputs will change the fundamental economics of the region, and it takes into account the costs as well as the benefits. And so that work is being done right now as you speak. We're meeting on it, and so we'll have those numbers probably later in the summer to present. But we really had to nail down what the network was going to look like, what the plan was going to look like before we could really start the economic analysis. And we've also, just on a side note, taken we're doing a similar analysis for the third border crossing. So we're using outside consultants. And again, the reason I want to do this is for transparency, to make sure that we don't have group think in here, so we bring other people in from the outside to help us when it comes to estimating some of these large numbers that would really impact the region.
Stuart, can I just add about the business development? In a case study is two projects. Look at the San Diego Trolley Blue Line. It used to be called the South Line when it was originally built. All the cities and the communities embraced that line, and the area developed around the stations over time. And so the Blue Line is the most, as the transit world folks say, it's the most productive line in the nation. Look at the Sprinter line. The cities along the Sprinter line fought the project. And so it's just over the past few years that the development has started to come near the stations as the communities have more embraced it. And so therefore the ridership will also come. And so these mobility hubs and then these transit options and how these things are located have been studied. And this is going to be economic boom areas for the regional development.
Cool. And then if I could, just a couple of follow-ups. First, Ray, not with regard to the economic development aspect of it, but just you referred in the presentation to the model showing the outcomes in terms of the shift in the mode shift, right?
Right.
I'm wondering if those models have been QC'd by any outside panel as part of that whole plan of excellence concept, or if that external QCing was really mostly focused on the revenue forecast.
No, so it's a very good question. And we did have that model QC'd. And in fact, it was QC'd by 12 experts from around the nation who are experts in regional transportation planning. Some of them were professors from universities. Others were transportation modelers from different MPOs like ourselves. And it was a several-day workshop, and we met twice with them. And the result of that is that the Sandag model, the one that we use, is above the state of the art right now, and other people are looking to us to use our model. So we share our model with other MPOs so they can do a better job. But the model itself has been peer reviewed. And we also have worked with ARB, the CARB in Air Resources Board, to validate the methodology that we're using. And we received a letter from them that shows that they're very happy with the model that we're doing and that no changes need to be done. So in terms of showing what the impact would be of making some of these infrastructure changes, this model does as good as it can be, right? Because you never know what the future really holds, but what it shows is that things like it makes sense mathematically in terms of what the mode shifts are going to be, and if this is built out. So we're pretty happy with the ABM model, which is our activity-based model, which is a series of multiple models that work together. But the one you're talking about, that has been peer reviewed.
Great, thanks. And I appreciate the time. Just one last question, if I could. Going back to that slide 44, where you're showing the revenue sources, I'm just wondering, particularly with regard to the social equity question, the fairly big increase in expected fare box revenues. I'm curious how much of that is really being driven by an assumption of increased usage as opposed to increased fares. Because obviously, anytime you start increasing fares, you start getting into issues of affordability and things of that nature.
I don't think we increased the fares in our assumption.
Go ahead.
Actually
Yeah.
decrease fares in our assumptions and looking at by 2035 actually having transit free for low income. So there's not a whole bunch of assumption there about fare box recovery as a source of funding.
Can I elaborate on this a little bit to Mr. Stewart's question on fares? And first of all, Sonny, I appreciate your comments, really thoughtful comments. Thank you. And Stewart, on the fares, I think you're going to hear very shortly at our board a discussion. And this doesn't have to wait for a sales tax measure or doesn't have to wait any longer about frankly making the youth and seniors free or looking at 24-hour service for the reason of social equity. So you're going to see that much sooner than the plan. But like Colleen said, if you look at the whole pricing and the whole system and the whole subsidies for both transit and automobile, we obviously has been subsidizing the automobile by much larger than you would make even transit free. Having said that, I think there is still resistance here in San Diego to these concepts of free fares, and we need to get used to it. But I said from day one when I started, I will not move a recommendation to the Sandag board of any fare increases of any kind, and I got into trouble for it, and I will still not recommend them, not the policymaker. The board will make that decision, but I will not recommend because I don't think it's right. Having said that, our transit leap in the 5 big moves relies very heavily on, and this is to your previous question about economic development and mobility hub. Our whole system relies very heavily in linking land use and transportation. And you might say, you don't have land use authorities, and we don't. And frankly, you've seen in public meetings, cities come out and says, well, these mobility hubs, what if I don't want a mobility hub? Well, shame on us if we're gonna think that way. Shame on us if we're gonna keep the stations for the mid-coast, the 9 stations for the mid-coast like a ghost parking lots. That's not the way it works. So economic development becomes a big part of this plan. And I think Ray Major, who has demonstrated his ability to do the economic work he did during the pandemic, is gonna have a whole chapter on the plan, what this means to the region, not just the direct job or the indirect job, but in terms of overall, when we talk about project, you lose that perspective. But when you talk about a system like the 5 big moves, I think you're gonna be impressed with that. And finally, regarding the social equity, I know that once we release the draft and once people see that some projects that been in the plans for the last 50 years are no longer there, they're gonna start asking what happened to my project. Well, you have to agree, when we passed the measure in 1987, which is 35 years ago, things were different than now. And so shame on us if we don't adjust and adapt. That's why I am so grateful to you by having a discussion last meeting about the ordinance change that's going to the board on Friday. And I think Ms. House alluded to, we needed to do planning in a way that never been done before, and that costs money. And we appreciated your recommendation to the board of giving us a bit more money to do that. But we would absolutely use this money in the future to do everything you talked about, both you, Sunny and Stuart, especially in the economic development, on the linking land use and transportation, and figuring out how we work with our cities who have absolute land use authorities, or they think they do, and make sure this works. Because otherwise this will not work. This will be another planning exercise, and nobody wants that.
Well, thank you, Director. I'm looking for more questions from the committee members. Mr. Franklin, I see that your hand is up.
Thank you, Chair Kinney. I wanted to ask a couple of questions regarding land use. I think kind of staying on that topic, specifically the SES. Director Ekrada, I think, mentioned the really kind of inexorable connection between transportation and land use. And so I know that as part of this update, there will be an updated SES, Colleen, and I was just wondering how you developed your mapping for that exercise in terms of the intensity, density, and types of land uses that are planned throughout the region out until 2050.
So land use is, my first love is land use. So that's an area that we've really focused on, and we've worked closely with all the local jurisdictions on, first of all, there's existing density in the region. So we know the activity centers where people are coming and going. And the idea then is to intensify existing areas within the urbanized part of the San Diego region. So I showed very briefly that map that showed the mobility hubs. Really the SCS land use pattern that we're talking about for the plan is focusing 90+% of all new growth in the region in those mobility hub areas. And in fact, we've been working very closely with the city of San Diego because most of those mobility hubs are in the city of San Diego, and they're working to align the community plan updates that they have underway to ensure that the kind of density that we're thinking about would happen in those areas. So that's where we're really trying to tie these two things together. Something that's very different in this plan, different than what we've done in the past. The previous plans, we've done a regional growth forecast of where we thought growth would happen. And that was the land use pattern that we included in the SCS. And just for everyone else here on the committee, the sustainable community strategy is really the element of the regional plan that is required by state law and actually has to get approved by the Air Resources Board. And SANDAG's charge is to look at land use and transportation together to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 19%. So per person. And so in the past plans, we did the land use pattern based on what cities were planning and we thought would happen and tried to match that up with the transportation plan. This time we've said, okay, what's the transportation system that would make sense today where we have existing density? And let's intensify in those areas where we have that existing land use. And that's what really maximizes the benefits, I think, in reducing vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So hopefully that gets to the question that you were asking.
It does. Thank you. I think that if I'm hearing this correctly, what we're looking at is, what we're planning in terms of transportation investments, and then assuming density will then follow in densifying those corridors and in and around those mobility hubs. And that's really, really a critical piece. I think that for my colleagues that may not be land use practitioners, at the individual implementation level in terms of a project, there are a number of streamlining measures in SB 375 that really can facilitate affordable housing production in general. Obviously, we know that we have a critical shortage of affordable housing, and we're going to have to build hundreds of thousands of additional units. And so I would just urge staff in your formulation of the SCS, making it very clear what the land use is, the density and intensity assumed in the plan, also where those high quality transit corridors are located. Because I personally have processed a number of transit priority projects, those projects that are eligible for SB 375, either streamlining or the use of a sustainable communities environmental assessment, which is a huge huge shift. And so while Sandag doesn't have direct land use authority, providing those clear opportunities to use the SKIA process in SB 375, it makes a very significant difference about how long it takes to bring affordable housing projects to market. And it's something that really Sandag can really help the industry in completing those projects.
Thank you. I mean, Mr. Franklin, I think you just probably put your hand in the most critical issue for us moving forward with this 5 big moves. I just want to mention, we just adopted last year the regional housing need assessment. And I want to remind the committee members that San Diego in the next 8 years is supposed to zone for 171,000 units. I want to remind the committee member that 80 or over 80% of these units supposed to be in the transit areas. That's what mobility hubs is all about. And so, of course, regional housing need assessment, even though has been strengthened lately, it's planning for or zoning for. But we believe very strongly, even so without land use authority, with some incentivized approach, we're going to make sure these mobility hubs get into the SCS, get into the transportation linkages. And finally, I think the governor's last year's budget gave us and gave the cities significant housing revenues. That we're going to use the Sandag portion to actually plan a local incentive program to do exactly what you just outlined, Mr. Franklin. So I think this is really critical. If this plan, if the 5 big moves were to work, we must pay attention to the land use linkages.
If I may, Mr. Chair Kenny, just add one more piece to that. We talk a lot about the urban areas, but what's so critical about this is that we're able to preserve our backcountry and our open space. And the piece that we've been working on very closely with both the city of San Diego and the county of San Diego, and Hassan mentioned the regional housing needs assessment. The county of San Diego received a very small number of housing units to plan for, because that's, outside the urbanized area of the region. And it's those two things together, by focusing our growth and development in the mobility hubs and preserving our open space, that really help us meet our climate goals. So I just wanted to make that point too. It's both sides of that land use piece.
All right. Any other questions from committee members? Well, I'm thinking I should have gone first because all my questions are kind of petty, but let me, at the beginning of the presentation, Ray, you said that you didn't use your traditional survey data, but your presentation had some fairly well populated data sets. Where did you get them?
Well, no, I may have misspoke. We did use the survey data, as we always have, to do the model and do the model calibration. And we created synthetic population from that survey data. But what we were able to do is to validate that data using these newer sources like the telephone data, like the cell phone data location. And that's not as nearly as precise as the survey that we collected. The survey we collected, we actually had asked people to download an app which had a GPS tracker in it, which really showed us, like, if they stopped at a Starbucks for a cup of coffee and then they went to a gas station to fill up, and then they went to work and they parked, and then they went to lunch and they walked out that corridor. We tracked all of that, so we get very detailed in terms of how people move around. What the cell phone data was able to do is to really allow us to kind of validate those, the more the directional, the longer chain movements, like where people go to and come from. The way that data was captured is that if the phone isn't moving for a certain amount of time at the beginning and the end, they consider that to be a trip. So if the phone moved, and so you could technically go get a cup of coffee at Starbucks and come back to your office, and it wouldn't be counted as a trip, and we wouldn't even know where you necessarily went. And so, but when you're dealing with these billions of observations, it starts to really give you an idea of patterns and helped us validate what we have in our survey information.
Gotcha. Okay. In the discussion about the OS, that's really interesting to me because we don't have any of that now, and the the things that you mentioned as part of it, the managed lanes, the transit, those are things that you already do, but are there any things that are going to be in the next operating system that we don't do right now? Anything involving connected vehicles? Are you planning on anything new that'll be a component of that?
Exactly. Actually, Chair Kenny, a lot is going to be new. And what we call future mobility, and obviously, we're not going to have all autonomous fleet anytime soon. We know that because we're not ready for that. The airman form is not ready for that. But we're going to have probably level 3 and 4 autonomous. But here, what I think is going to be definitely new. One, in the design of our, say, mobility hub, the central mobility hub, we're not going to have as many parking spaces, but we're going to have a lot of places for people to be picked up and dropped off. We are going to have walkable, bikeable places, even it might not be justified by the use, but by the urban form kind of situation. We're going to have an app-operated systems, period. You're in your house, you're a commuter, you want to go from A to B, you enter it in your app, you pay for it before you leave your house, and you determine as an individual which mode you're going to take and how much it's going to cost. These kind of, because of what Ray just mentioned, that kind of data we're having is going to allow us to use the technology that exists today and anticipating some technology in the future. We expect conductive charging or some kind of charging for future electric car to be in place. We're going to actually try and get Sandag to do a pilot, to be the first in the world to pilot a few miles of that. So we can go for, and I'll have Colleen and Ray add, future mobility and data-driven approach are really the key element of this plan, of this 5 big moves. So I think we're going to see quite a bit of changes. It's no longer, are we going to drive or take transit? That's a part of the past. It is a system that works together that allow people to have choices and allow them to do it with ease. So you're going to see an Uber and Lyft type of model when it comes to microtransit. One of the 5 big moves is the smart shuttles. Smart shuttles will not work without the operating system. These have to be hopefully electric, shared, but app operated, so it's on demand. It's like you're calling over a Lyft. So I would say, and I know we don't focus on this a lot on the presentation, but a lot of the aspects of even the normal thing is going to be different because of technology.
So, Chair Kenny, if you think about when we talk about the next operating system, it's more of a holistic look. And so think about what's happened in the last decade in terms of like the Internet of Things and everything starting to be connected and talking to each other on the internet. And so that's one of the fundamental principles that revolutionizes everything. And we don't necessarily need to be in charge of it. What we need to do is plan for this happening in our region. And so when automobiles can talk to each other, or signals can talk to each other, or buildings or parking can talk to each other, you can start leveraging that. When that Internet of Things creates a tremendous amount of big data. And then now analyzing that big data using things like artificial intelligence will be overlaid on top of the transportation system, allowing it to become much more efficient. And a lot of these things are already, as Hassan says, they're here because like GPS, for instance, that everybody uses, we already know where these automobiles are. And so being able to have more sophisticated applications on top of that, starting to manage all of this, is really what private industry is doing right now as we speak. And our job is really to be ready for that in terms of policies and in terms of infrastructure. So when we talk about things like parking, it's like if there's a car on the street, maybe it would be much better for that parking space not to be dedicated car all the time. Maybe sometimes it's there for passenger drop off or Uber drop off or deliveries and that type of stuff. And then, it can park at a different time. And so curb management would be something we could do by using all of that data and creating even more information sharing within the region. So that's kind of where that whole next operating system comes from. It's evolving as we speak today.
Ray, just a point of order. Ariana, should we be taking a 5-minute break along with the interpreter, or is that just, we're going to continue?
Yes, that would be for the meeting. So the participants in the meeting, the committee itself, and the interpreter, if possible. And we can wait until you finalize discussion on this item and maybe take the 5-minute break before the next item, if that is okay with you.
As long as so our interpreter is still engaged, right?
I
Did just take a break. All right, sorry for that. Ray, so if possible, we'll wait till the end of this item if the interpreter is okay with that, and then we'll go ahead and take a break. Ray, thank you very much for the answer. That was thorough. I am always looking forward to more information about the next OS. Last two questions are on the same slide. When we looked at the different mode share in the future, carpool went way up. So it was 19%, I think, on one of those years. I don't know of anybody who carpools the same way my father did. How are you defining carpool?
Well, the reason that carpool goes up the way that it does is that we start to have methods to change people's behavior. And that is the introduction of these high occupancy tolled lanes, for instance, where you would give carpools a break. And by being able to do that, you know, if it's free to carpool, but it costs money to drive on the general purpose lanes, then all of a sudden you'll get more of a mode shift. And so that's where some of that those numbers come in, is that we're actually giving alternatives, and you're having a better experience because there's different ways to get around using carpool rather than just single occupancy. And those are also things like
the managed lanes.
And Uber.
Okay. On that same slide under other, you have school bus listed. I was surprised to see that. You know, if you've worked for a small city or a rural community, school traffic is even a bigger headache than commuter traffic. Is there any discussion about school bus ridership increasing?
You know, I don't think that we've specifically discussed that. That's all in the other category. So there's a lot of other things that add up to that,
Sure.
you know, 0.6% of the trips, which is a relatively small number, but just for completeness, they're added in there.
Okay, fair enough. So they do exist, but we're not looking to see those go up. All right, my last question had to do with the use tax. As vehicles become more and more efficient and fully electric vehicles become more and more prevalent, the gas tax is starting to become problematic, and we've seen some other states implement VMT tax to supplement the gas tax. And you mentioned that as a potential source for what would be transit projects and other things as well. But the cost of maintaining the roads is not going to go down, even with decreased ridership, probably, and certainly not with electric vehicles. The cost of the roads maintaining the roads are going to be the same. Is there really enough revenue available through VMT to do all of those things?
Well, let me just address that. So state of California right now have a trial happening to look at vehicle mile travel as a replacement for the gas tax. I don't think we can sustain the funding source to maintain what we have with the existing gas tax because of what you mentioned. Not only electric vehicles, but vehicles are getting more efficient. So in real value, that tax, both at the federal and state level, is going to go way down. Having said that, I think we're counting for a transition period. And you know, we still have some issues with revenues that we're talking about. The vehicle mile travel, for example, there's a privacy issue that we have to overcome. There is also an issue of how do you do this without being so regressive and not hurting the low income and minority groups. But I can assure you that in the next 2 decades, a replacement for the gas tax must happen because, like you mentioned, rightly so, Chair, we won't have enough money to maintain what we have, let alone building new things.
Thank you very much for that. Those are all the questions that I have. Appreciate your responses there. One last query of the committee members. Is there anyone else who would like to ask a question of staff? All right, seeing none, on behalf of the committee, thank you very much. That was a long presentation, very thorough. Look forward to that. We are going to take a 5-minute break before we go on to the next item. I have 11:20, so that brings us back at 11:25. And just a note for staff on our next item, I see it's listed as a discussion possible action. Maybe when we can come back, you might explain what possible actions you were thinking of. But in any case, a 5-minute break. We'll be back at 11:25. So Ms. Zerneden, just give me a sign when we're ready to go and we will start back up again.
Will do. I will check in with staff to see if the interpreter is ready. Yes, we are ready to go. Thank you.
All right, so that was item number 10. So we're going to move on to item number 11, which is a presentation by Grace Minow, the 2020 State of the Commute Report. Grace, are you ready to go?
Yes, good morning, committee members. And just wanted to mention that there's no action that's required of the committee. We were just thinking that maybe the subcommittee might want additional topics added to the State of the Commute for next year. So apologize for the confusion, and we can start. My name is Grace Minow. I'm a senior research analyst at SANDAG, and I just wanted to say good morning, ITOC chair and committee members. Next slide. Just to give a quick overview of the PowerPoint, we're just going to do a brief background of the TransNet ordinance and how the State of the Commute relates to that. We'll also go over changes that were made to the 2020 State of the Commute info bit. And then we'll go over the results of the 2020 State of the Commute and then the next steps for the 2021 State of the Commute. Next slide, please. So the background for ITOC's role on the State of the Commute report. This is the actual verbiage from the TransNet ordinance that on an annual basis review ongoing SANDAG system performance evaluations, including SANDAG's State of the Commute report, and provide an independent analysis of information included in that report. The State of the Commute info bits should have been first one sent out with the mail out, but it should also be in your full agenda packet. And it's also located on our SANDAG website. The evaluation process is expected to include such factors as level of service measurements by roadway segment and by time of day throughput in major travel corridors, and travel time comparisons by mode between major trip and origin and destinations. And this information will be used as a tool in the RTP development process. Next slide, please. So background on the State of the Commute. State of the Commute report started in 2005, and it was a collaboration with Caltrans, MTS, NCTD, and SANDAG staff to define the performance measures that were indicators for the State of the Commute report. So far, we've completed 10 reports and 3 info bits, and some of those were consolidated. They were 2 years or 3 years collapsed into one large report. And so now we've moved to a smaller, shorter, summarized version that isn't like a 50 or 100-page report. This current State of the Commute is about 8 pages long. Next slide, please. So just a quick overview of the process of the changes that were made to the 2020 State of the Commute info bit. We had met with the ITOC subcommittee both in December 2020 and in April 2021. Subcommittee members were Chair Kenny and Stuart Halpern and Les Hopper. We removed the peak freeway delay indicator since the indicator only showed that it had been increasing the last 10 years prior to COVID. And then this year, with recommendations from the subcommittee, we had added senior mini grant data, bike count and bikeway miles. And then we also added a description of TransNet and ITOC's role with State of the Commute to the actual info bit. Next slide, please. So the 2020 State of the Commute results. I want to first point out that it starts from the actual time period is calendar year 2020, so January through December 2020. And the results are different from what we're seeing today, given that we're taking a look back and just looking at a snapshot of the annual progress. Because I mean, if you're back on the freeways now, you can see that traffic has returned during the peak periods. And we can't talk about 2020 without discussing COVID-19's impact on and how it's impacted our transportation network. As you can see on the slide, peak period travel was down by about 17%. Highway travel times were down on all 25 major commute corridors. Transit travel time was down on 14 of the 16 routes. Ridership was also down considerably compared to 2019. And what did increase was bike activity across 8 bike routes by 31%. And there was also an increase on passenger trips through the senior mini grant program. Next slide, please. Peak period highway travel was down overall for 2020, and we obtained this data using the Caltrans Performance Measurement System, which is our data source, which is PEMS, which is Caltrans data source, but that's the source that we use to monitor this. Next slide, please. And just again, a quick overview on highway and transit travel times on major commute corridors. Through the 25 highway corridors, travel times did decrease. And then again, out of 14 out of 16 transit routes, they had also decreased the travel times, and 2 had no change. And bus commute times also did decrease. Next slide, please. Transit ridership also decreased in 2020. The regional transit ridership decreased by 58%. Average weekday transit passenger miles decreased, and transit revenue miles also decreased. Next slide, please. Also, the regional rail and bus transit ridership also decreased for the most frequently used trolley lines and the Sprinter. And all 6 bus routes monitored had also had significant decreases. And you can see that in the blue numbers that are highlighted, what the percent decrease was from 2019 to 2020. Next slide, please. Something new that we had added based off of recommendations from the ITOC subcommittee was adding senior mini grant data. And this is some of the funding from the TransNet measure has gone towards this. And in 2020, the demand for funding has grown, and that was measured by an increase in our senior population. The number of grant applications has been increasing every year, and there has also been an increase in the volume of rides that were provided to the seniors. Again, 1.4 million was given to grantees, and there was a total of 215,000 one-way passenger trips for our seniors. Next slide, please. Again, another new indicator that was added this year was regional bikeways. TransNet has funded key segments of the San Diego Regional Bike Network with several projects in the planning, environmental, or construction phases. SANDAG, in partnership with a lot of local agencies, have implemented more than 400 miles of bikeways since 2010, and thus there's been a 31% increase in total centerline regional bikeway mileage since 2020. We've put the different types of bikeway miles or bike lanes and multi-use paths and what was considered, and the definition for that is in the info bits, and we did get that from the California Vehicle Code and presenting the 4 different types of classes in the San Diego region. Next slide, please. And again, bike regional counts across 8 different bikeways had increased in 2020 from 2019. Overall, we had a 31% increase in bike activity. Next slide, please. So the next steps for the 2021 State of the Commute info bits is Ray had showed you in the previous presentation about incorporating big data. We also will be incorporating the telework survey data. We had just completed that project, and the report full report is on our website, but for future years, we are planning to monitor, continue the telework survey for both businesses and for residents, because we want to see how telework is being impacted as more people are getting vaccinated and as more people are returning back to the office. We want to see how that is being impacted as everybody goes back to work and school. We'll also work on how to incorporate the live and work data that Ray had mentioned in the previous presentation. We are also awaiting recommendations from the Transportation Performance Framework. It was to help align our efforts and recommendations that were also given from external audits. And then we're going to return back to the ITOC committee for the selection of new subcommittee members for the 2021 State of the Commute. Next slide. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone may have. You're mute.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your presentation. Before we bring it up to committee for discussion, quick question for the committee. Do we have any members of the public who would like to speak on this issue?
No, Chair, we do not have any public comments.
Thank you very much. With that, I note that Vice Chair House has her hand up. So if you have a question.
Thank you. Thank you, Grace, for the presentation. I have a question about the senior mini grant program and the increase during COVID. I'm just curious, when everybody was asked to stay home, especially seniors, what do you attribute that increase to?
I can ask our staff who collects that data.
Okay.
I don't know off the top of my head, but I can ask and come back to you with the answer for that.
I'm just curious if that is actually seniors going out, or is it writing to, or providing meals to them, or what was the reason? If the program was used for that, it's very interesting. I can understand the bike increase. We've heard about that. We know more people got on their bikes, went and bought bikes, but very curious about that particular data. So, all right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Grace, I did have a question. We're still looking for a home for safety data. This is the commute, and it's in the past it had always been reported in terms of delay increases or miles traveled. Do you think that this would be a good place to report things related to safety, as we are now spending more money on safety and emphasizing safety as opposed to decreased delay? The reason I think it may be is the units are the same. You're typically talking about miles traveled or total entering volume entering an intersection. It's the same type of analysis you do for delay that you do to evaluate safety. Has there ever been any discussion at staff level about reporting safety features as part of the commute?
Yes, and that was part of the Transportation Performance Network Framework report that we had Audit. Our audits had given us recommendations as far as safety data as well. And so then we had Kimley Horn, which was our consultant. We were awaiting the final results from the Transportation Performance Framework to see where we would place the safety data. So it is in the works. We just don't know yet, but it is coming. So once we figure out where the home shall be, I will be happy to let you all know.
Thank you very much. All right, one last call for questions here. Looking for hands, seeing none. Is there any direction we might want to provide to staff beyond what we related in the questions? Okay, I think in this case, we will receive and file a report, and thank you for presenting it today, and move on to our next item. Item number 12 is continuation of public comments from previous or the beginning of the meeting. Are there any members of the public now who would like to speak on items either not on the agenda or to supplement previous comments? Kimberly?
Chair Kinney, we do not have any additional public comments.
All All right, well, we were consistent there. All right. The agenda says our next meeting is May 12th. May 12th? Maybe June 12th?
That would be June. June 9th.
Yes,
Yeah.
June 9th. Thank you very much. So June 9th, 9:30, same as, same time?
That is correct.
Okay, with that, we will go ahead and adjourn the meeting. One last, any comments for the greater good from any of the committee members? Nope. All right. Well, thank you very much. We'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting and reconvene on June 9th, 9:30.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.